March 24, 1945. 14 hours and 17 minutes. Two doors open simultaneously, 5,000 kilometers apart. The first door, the canopy of a P-51C Mustang painted crimson red, screaming through frozen air at 7,000 meters above Berlin. First Lieutenant Marcus Hayes, 23 years old, pulls back the stick with gloved hands that have saved 42 lives in the past 6 months. Below him, a formation of 50 B-17 flying fortresses, carrying 2 Hun, Dread and 80 white American men toward a munitions factory. Above them, diving at 600 kilometers per hour, 3 Focke-Wulf 190s with their cannons already spitting tracer fire. Hayes banks hard left, his engine roaring at 2,700 revolutions per minute, closing the gap in 8 seconds. His wingman, Lieutenant David Wilson, mirrors the maneuver perfectly. They've done this dance 73 times before. The second door, the side entrance of Miller's Diner in Tuskegee, Alabama. Catherine Hayes, 51 years old, stands in the alley holding exact change for 1 cup of coffee, while she waits for news of her son. The front door, 12 feet away, remains closed to her. Has been closed for 51 years. Will remain closed when her son returns home. If he returns home. Through the window, she can see white patrons reading newspapers with headlines about heroic American aviators. Her son's photograph will never appear in those papers, though at this act moment, 7,000 meters above Germany, he is saving 10 of those heroic aviators from certain death. Lieutenant Hayes fires a 2-second burst. 50 caliber rounds tear through the Focke-Wulf's left wing at 850 meters per second. The German fighter rolls inverted, trailing black smoke, pilot ejecting into the frozen sky. The B-17 formation continues unscathed. In the lead bomber, Captain Richard Morrison will return home to a parade in Des Moines, Iowa. 20 The U's and people will line the streets. Bands will play. His photograph will make the front page of 17 newspapers. He will never know the name of the man who saved his life. Will never know that man cannot walk through the front door of restaurants in the country they both serve. What nobody articulated in that moment. The same United States Army Air Forces maintained both doors. One opened by desperate necessity, the other closed by deliberate conviction. 6 months earlier, Ramatelli Air Base, Italy, September 1944. The 332nd Fighter Group occupied the eastern sector of the airfield, separated from white squadrons by 200 meters of runway and an invisible barrier more impenetrable than any Axis defense. 312 pilots, all Negro, all graduates of Tuskegee Army Airfield, where they trained in aircraft identical to white cadets but could not eat in the same cafeteria, use the same latrines, or drink from the same water fountains. Major Robert T. Coleman, commanding officer of the 100th Fighter Squadron, stood in the operations tent, reviewing mission statistics that told a story the official reports refused to acknowledge. In 7 months of bomber escort duty, his group had flown 1,478 missions. Bombers lost while under their protection, 6 aircraft out of 1,478. Less than 0.5%. He compared this to the report sitting beside it marked classified, showing losses for other fighter groups flying identical missions with identical aircraft. The 325th Fighter Group flying P-47 Thunderbolts, 207 bombers lost in 9 months. Loss rate, 14.3%. The 52nd Fighter Group flying Spitfires, 189 bombers lost in 8 months. Loss rate, 16.7%. The white groups in P-51 Mustangs, the same aircraft his men flew, average loss rate of 11.2%. His pilots were statistically 22 times more effective at keeping bombers alive. This fact appeared nowhere in the commendations, nowhere in the press releases, nowhere in the official histories being written in real time by embedded journalists who somehow never embedded with the 382nd. Lieutenant Hayes had calculated his own statistics in a letter to his mother, written by lamplight 3 weeks earlier. Mother, I have flown 68 combat missions. In those missions, I have ESCO, ARTED formations totaling 412 bombers. Not one has been lost to enemy fighters while under my protection. Not one. Yesterday I returned to base and was told I could not enter the officers' club through the front entrance. I must use the kitchen door. I have saved perhaps 200 lives. I cannot drink a beer in the same room as the men whose lives I saved. Catherine Hayes kept that letter in her purse, folded into quarters, the paper soft from repeated reading. She carried it when she walked to the back door of Miller's Diner. carried it when she sat in the colored section of the bus, carried it when she heard radio broadcasts about American air superiority over Europe, broadcasts that never mentioned the crimson-tailed Mustangs, never mentioned Tuskegee, never mentioned the word Negro except in separate segments about the colored troops doing support work. March 24th, 1945. The same day, different hour. Ramitelli Air Base, 08 Hu. On dread hours. Mission briefing for 72 pilots of the 332nd Fighter Group. The target, Berlin. The bombers, 96 B-17s carrying 960 men from the 483rd Bombardment Group. The intelligence officer, Captain James Warren, white, transferred from another group specifically to work with the 332nd, stood before the map with pins marking the route. Gentlemen, you'll be escorting the 483 deep into Germany. Expect heavy fighter opposition. Luftwaffe has pulled back experienced pilots from the Eastern Front. You'll face men with 500, 600 combat hours. He paused, looking at the pilots before him. 72 men who averaged 420 combat hours each, who had trained longer than their white counterparts because funding for Tuskegee came grudgingly, who had proven themselves in ways white pilots never had to prove themselves, and who would return from this mission to separate quarters, separate mess halls, separate ever. Why thing? Warren continued. The 483 specifically requested you. Their commander, Colonel Harrison, flew with you 3 times before. Lost 0 aircraft all 3 missions. He knows what you can do, even if the press doesn't. Simultaneously, 5,000 kilometers away, Tuskegee, Alabama. Catherine Hayes sat in the colored waiting room of the Western Union office. The white waiting room, visible through interior windows, had padded chairs and magazines. The colored waiting room, had wooden benches and peeling paint. Both rooms received the same telegrams. The yellow envelopes that began with, "The War Department regrets to inform you," passed through both rooms with equal frequency. But the white families received their telegrams with condolences from staff. The colored families received theirs slid across a counter without eye contact. She had been waiting for 17 days without news. 17 days since Marcus's last letter. In that letter he had written about a Ischen, where his squadron protected bombers through a gauntlet of 140 German fighters. We didn't lose a single bomber, Mother. But when we landed, the mechanics who refuel our aircraft aren't allowed to eat with the mechanics who refuel the White Squadron's aircraft. Same fuel, same aircraft, same war, different doors. March 24th, 14 hours and 17 minutes. Lieutenant Marcus Hayes has just shot down his 9th confirmed kill. The B-17 formation below him is intact. Every single aircraft, every single crew. 280 men who will return to bases in England, who will write letters home about flak and fighters, who will receive medals and promotions, who will be interviewed by journalists, who will become the face of American air power. None of them knows the name Marcus Hayes. None of them knows about Tuskegee. When they describe their mission in letters home, they will write about fighter cover and our escorts, without ever mentioning that their escorts were Negro pilots, who couldn't use the same officers' clubs, who couldn't attend the same dances, who couldn't celebrate victories in the same bars. Captain Richard Morrison, in the lead B-17, keys his radio. Red Tail Leader, this is Big Friend Actual. You boys just saved our bacon. Thank you. His voice carries genuine gratitude. It will be the only thanks Hayes receives. There will be no commendation, no newspaper article, no letter from the bombardment group commander. Just a radio call lost in static, witnessed by no one except the men in the moment. Hayes responds, Big Friend Actual, Red Tail Leader. Just doing our job, sir. Get those bombs on target. Professional. Precise. Betraying none of the bitter irony. His job includes protecting men who wouldn't protect his right to vote in Alabama, wouldn't protect his mother's right to walk through the front door, wouldn't protect his own right to be treated as a full citizen of the country he's defending at Seto. Then 1,000 meters above Germany, simultaneously, Tuskegee, Alabama. Catherine Hayes receives no radio call, receives no thanks, receives no acknowledgement that her son is, at this exact moment, performing aerial combat that will be studied in military academies for decades, but never attributed to the pilots who perfected it. She waits in the colored section. She drinks from the colored fountain. She exists in the same country her son is defending, but not the same America. The German pilot Marcus Hayes just shot down. Oberleutnant Franz Weber, 41 years old, veteran of 270 combat missions, will be captured by Soviet forces 3 days later. In his interrogation, recorded in documents declassified 60 years later, he will tell his captors about the American fighters with red tails. They fight differently, he will say in German, translated by a bored Soviet lieutenant. More disciplined. They never leave the bombers to chase glory. White American pilots. They see a kill. They abandon formation. The Schwarze pilots, never. They protect the bombers like mother wolves. We learn to avoid any formation with red tails. Better odds against the others. This assessment, this professional military evaluation from an enemy ace, will remain classified until 2004. The men Weber described will return to Alabama, to Georgia, to Mississippi, where they will be denied service at gas stations, threatened for looking at white women, forced to the back of buses. Some will be beaten by white veterans who never saw combat. Some will have their uniforms torn off them by civilians who consider it an insult that a Negro man wears the uniform. None of this will appear in the triumphant narratives of American victory. March 24, 1945, 1600 hours. The 332nd Fighter Group returns to Ramitelli. 72 aircraft departed. 71 return. Lieutenant Thomas Mitchell, 24 years old, was shot down. Over Austria. He will spend the next 6 weeks in a German POW camp where, in a final irony, he will be treated better by his German captors than by American military police in some southern states. The Germans will house him with other officers. American MPs in Georgia will force him to the back of military trains. Separated from white POWs, he outranks. The returning pilots taxi to their revetments. Ground crews swarm the aircraft. Men whose hands are oil-stained and expert, who can diagnose engine problems by sound alone, who keep these machines flying through discipline and dedication, and who cannot eat in the same mess hall as white ground crews maintaining inferior aircraft with higher loss rates. The mechanics chief, Sergeant William Crawford, 41 years old, veteran of World War I where he also served in a segregated unit, runs his hand along the wing of Hayes's Mustang. 16 bullet holes stitched across the fuselage. Close. Too close. Lieutenant Hayes, sir, you. Bring her back ventilated again, Crawford says, his voice carrying the weary humor of a man who has spent 27 years watching young men fly into death. Gonna run out of aluminum patching these birds. Hayes climbs down, his flight suit dark with sweat despite the freezing altitude. Keep her flying, Sergeant. That's all I ask. What he doesn't say. Keep her flying so I can protect more men who won't acknowledge my existence. Keep her flying so I can prove something that should never require proof. Keep her flying so I can return to a country that considers me 3/5 of a person, though I'm expected to provide 100% of the courage. Simultaneously, 5,000 kilometers away, Western Union Office, Tuskegee, Alabama. 1,600 hours local time equals 2,200 hours in Italy. Catherine Hayes has been waiting for 9 hours. The clerk, a white woman named Dorothy Morrison, whose brother is Captain Richard Morrison, currently flying over Gary. Many in a B-17, has spoken to every white person who entered the office today, has said good afternoon, and how may I help you, and I'm sure he's fine, dear. She has not spoken one word to Catherine Hayes in 9 hours, has not made eye contact, has not acknowledged her existence. At 16:37, a telegram arrives addressed to Mrs. Catherine Hayes. It sits on the counter for 4 minutes before Dorothy Morrison slides it across without looking up. No words, no condolences prepared. No humanity extended. The yellow envelope contains 8 words. Lieutenant Marcus Hayes missing in action over Austria. Details follow. Catherine Hayes reads these words in the colored waiting room, while Dorothy Morrison laughs with a white customer about something trivial, something that doesn't matter, something that happens in the America where front doors open easily and telegrams about missing sons come with sympathy instead of silent contempt. Lieutenant Thomas Mitchell, the missing pilot mentioned in that telegram, is at that exact moment being dragged from a frozen creek by 2 German farmers who will give him bread and water before turning him over to military authorities. These enemy farmers will show him more basic human dignity than he will receive in some American towns when he returns home. But the telegram says only missing in action. It doesn't say that Mitchell was shot down protecting bombers that made it home safely. Doesn't say that all 96 B-17s completed their mission with 0 losses. A statistical impossibility made routine by the 332nd Fighter Group. Doesn't say that Captain Richard Morrison, Dorothy Morrison's brother, landed safely in England specifically because Lieutenant Mitchell drew enemy fire away from his formation. Doesn't say that Dorothy Morrison owes her brother's life to the pilots she refuses to acknowledge in her office. March through May, 1945. The 302nd Fighter Group flies 217 additional missions. They escort 1,809 bombers. They lose 3 bombers total to enemy fighters. 3 out of 1,809. Loss rate, 0.16%. The national average for other fighter groups in the same period, 9.3%. The 302nd is statistically 58 times more effective. These numbers appear in classified after-action reports read by 3 generals, 14 colonels, and 47 staff officers. One of these men recommend commendations for the 332nd. None suggest press coverage. None propose integration of the forces. The statistics that would revolutionize fighter tactics remain buried in folders marked Negro Units, Fighter, in filing cabinets in the Pentagon. The pilots who created these statistics return to bases where they are prohibited from using facilities used by pilots with worse records, fewer kills, higher loss rates, and infinitely more media coverage. Lieutenant Hayes flies his 89th mission on April 30, 1945. He escorts 52 B-24 Liberators to Czechoslovakia. They encounter 73 German fighters, the largest aerial battle the 382nd has faced in 6 months. Hayes shoots down 2 Mi-109s in 4 minutes. His squadron shoots down 11 total. All 52 bombers return safely. 520 men land in England because of the discipline, skill, and courage of pilots who will be denied service at gas stations WWII. They return to Alabama. On the same day, 5,000 kilometers away, Catherine Hayes receives her 3rd letter in 6 weeks from Marcus. He writes, "Mother, the war is ending. We hear Hitler is finished. Maybe when we come home, things will be different. Maybe saving all these lives will matter. Maybe they'll see us as pilots, not colored pilots. Maybe we won't need separate doors anymore." The letter is dated April 7th, written before his 89th mission, before he saved 520 more lives, before he added 2 more kills to his total. The hope in the letter will be destroyed by the reality waiting at home. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. Germany surrenders unconditionally. The war is over. In London, 2 million people pour into the streets to celebrate. American airmen are mobbed by grateful crowds, kissed by English girls, interviewed by journalists from every major newspaper. The celebrations last 3 days. Every major aim. Rican newspaper runs front-page photographs of Army Air Forces officers in victory parades. Not one photograph shows a pilot from the 332nd Fighter Group. In Italy, the 332nd Fighter Group holds a quiet ceremony at Ramatelli Air Base. No press attends. No generals give speeches. Major Coleman reads a list of names. 66 pilots killed in action, 32 shot down and captured, 84 wounded, 182 casualties. They have flown 15,733 sorties. They have escorted 15,000 bombers. They have lost bombers under their protection, a total of 27 over 18 months. Loss rate, 0.18%. Major Coleman doesn't read the comparison statistics. He doesn't need to. Every pilot in the room knows what white fighter groups lost in the same period. Every pilot knows their record is unprecedented. Every pilot knows this achievement will be systematically ignored for the next 60 years. Tear the ceremony, Lieutenant Hayes writes to his mother. The war is over. We're coming home. I'm not sure how I feel. Over here, we're pilots. Just pilots. Our aircraft don't care what color we are. The Germans don't shoot differently at red tails than white tails. We're judged by what we do, not what we look like. I'm afraid of going home. Afraid that saving 600 lives, shooting down 9 enemy aircraft, earning the Distinguished Flying Cross won't matter as much as the color of my skin. Afraid the front door will still be closed. June, 1945. The 332nd Fighter Group receives orders to return to the United States. They will ship out in groups over 3 weeks. They will travel on transport ships where Negro servicemen are housed in separate quarters from white servicemen. They will sleep in the same holds used for cargo on the outbound journey. Some ships have signs directing colored troops to specific areas, different from white troops, despite identical UN forms, identical service records, identical sacrifices. The journey takes 14 days. On day 7, the transport ship carrying Lieutenant Hayes passes another transport ship carrying German prisoners of war to camps in America. These enemy prisoners will be allowed to eat in restaurants in Texas that will refuse service to Hayes. They will be allowed to sit in the main sections of buses where Hayes must sit in the back. They will receive treatment under the Geneva Convention that guarantees them basic dignity, while Hayes will receive treatment under Jim Crow laws that guarantee him systematic humiliation. Hayes watches the other ship pass, sees German soldiers on deck, men he fought against, men who bombed American cities, men who served a regime built on racial superiority. Those men will be treated better in America than he will. This thought circles his mind for 3 days. He writes nothing to his mother about it. Some truths are too bitter to speak. July 4th, 1945. Independence Day. The transport arrives in Norfolk, Virginia. 107 pilots of the 302nd Fighter Group, men who have saved thousands of American lives, who have combat records unmatched by any other fighter group, who have proven courage beyond question, disembark into a country celebrating freedom. They are immediately directed to colored waiting areas, while white servicemen with no combat experience are directed to main waiting rooms with food, comfortable seating, and welcome home celebrations. The pilots who flew together, fought together, saved each other's lives in the skies over Europe, are now separated by domestic military policy. White liaison officers who never saw combat tell combat veterans where they can and cannot stand, where they can and cannot sit, where they can and cannot eat. Some of these liaison officers are younger, lower ranked, with zero combat experience. They order around captains and majors who have distinguished flying crosses. Lieutenant Hayes stands in the colored waiting area, still wearing his uniform with his medals, and watches white sailors receive thanks from civilians, receive handshakes and hugs, receive acknowledgement. No civilian approaches the colored section. No one says welcome home. No one says thank you. The invisible barrier that separated pilots by 200 meters in Italy separates them by 20 feet in Virginia. But the 20 feet might as well be 200 kilometers. At the train station, the separation continues. White servicemen board through the front of the train, settle into comfortable seats with cushions and windows. Negro servicemen, including pilots with combat records, board through separate entrances into separate cars with wooden benches and poor ventilation. The train cars are marked. The separation is official. The military that required their courage now requires their humiliation. Lieutenant Hayes boards the colored car. He finds a wooden bench near the back, sits in his uniform, with his distinguished flying cross, and his air medal with 8 oak leaf clusters representing 49 missions. Across the platform, he sees Captain Richard Morrison, the bomber pilot whose life he saved on March 24th, boarding the white car. Morrison doesn't see him, doesn't know him, doesn't know that the Negro pilot on the wooden bench in the colored car is the reason Morrison is alive to board any train at all. The train departs Norfolk at 1300 hours, heading south through Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama. Every state increases the segregation. Every mile south makes the separation more rigid, more absolute, more humiliating. In South Carolina, military police board the train to ensure Negro servicemen remain in colored cars. One MP, a corporal who never deployed overseas, walks through the colored car checking papers. His authority over combat veterans derived entirely from the color barrier that gives him power over men who outrank him in every measure except melanin. Major Robert Coleman, commanding officer, sits in the colored car wearing his uniform with his distinguished flying cross and his medals for 87 combat missions. The MP corporal checks his papers with barely concealed contempt, doesn't salute, doesn't acknowledge rank, says, "Papers are in order. Stay in this car." A corporal giving orders to a major, the major who commanded 312 pilots in combat against the most advanced air force in the world, ordered to stay in his place by a man who never heard a shot fired in anger. Coleman says nothing. What would be the point? The corporal represents a system more rigid than German air defenses, more absolute than any military hierarchy. Coleman, who made split-second decisions at 400 kilometers per hour while being shot at by cannons, who kept formation cohesion through flak and fighters, who brought his pilots home alive through discipline and skill, sits silently and obeys orders from a man who wouldn't last 10 seconds in aerial combat. The train continues south. In Georgia, white veterans board, men returning from combat in Europe and the Pacific. They walk through the colored car to reach the white cars. Some glance at the Negro pilots in uniform with their medals. Some show flickers of recognition. Brief moments where they see the decorations and understand these are combat veterans. Then they continue walking. The recognition means nothing, changes nothing. They pass through the colored car like it's a different country, a foreign space that exists in the same train, but not the same America. July 7th, 1945. The train reaches Tuskegee, Alabama. 53 pilots disembark, men who flew from this town's training field to combat over 3 continents. Men who defended the idea of America against fascism. Men who now return to the reality of America under Jim Crow. There is no parade, no band, no CR. Out of grateful civilians. 17 people wait at the platform. Family members who came to the colored section of the station, who weren't allowed to wait on the main platform, where white families greeted white servicemen. Catherine Hayes stands in the colored waiting area, holding the letters from her son. Letters describing missions and combat and courage. She sees Marcus step off the train, still lean from military food, still wearing his uniform with his medals, still young at 23. A butt with eyes that have seen too much. She embraces him in silence. Words fail in the face of emotions too large for language. Relief that he's alive. Pride in what he's accomplished. Grief for what he's endured. Fury at what awaits him. They walk to the colored exit of the station. Marcus Hayes, who saved hundreds of lives at 7,000 meters, who outflew enemy aces, who proved himself in ways that should never require proof, walks to the colored exit because the main exit is not for high. His mother, who waited in colored sections while he fought in integrated skies, walks beside him. They pass white veterans being greeted with cheers and thanks. No one cheers for them. No one thanks them. They are invisible in victory, as they were invisible in combat. That evening, Marcus and Catherine walk to Miller's diner. Marcus wants a hamburger. Simple. Normal. The kind of thing any returning veteran might want. They approach the front door. There's no sign. There doesn't need to be. Everyone knows. Everyone has always known. Marcus reaches for the front door handle, his hand that pulled the stick through 9 kills and 89 missions and 15,000 kilometers of combat. His mother touches his arm, shakes her head. They walk to the side entrance, to the alley, to the colored entrance where they can order food to go but cannot sit at the counter. Inside, through the window, Captain Richard Morrison sits at the counter eating a hamburger. Morrison, whose life Hayes saved on March 24th, whose formation made it to target because of Hayes' skill, whose brother sits next to him celebrating his return. Morrison will finish his hamburger, will pay at the counter, will walk out the front door, will drive home to his parade planned for next week in Des Moines. He will never know that the Negro pilot waiting in the alley is the reason he's alive to eat that hamburger. Hayes orders 2 hamburgers to go from the side window. The cook, a Negro man named Jai, Mez, who has worked at Miller's for 19 years, takes the order without meeting his eyes. James knows the uniform, recognizes the medals, understands what they mean. But James also knows the rules, knows the system, knows that acknowledging Hayes' service might cost him his job. He prepares the hamburgers in silence, wraps them in paper, hands them through the window, accepts payment, says only thank you. Nothing about the medals, nothing about the uniform, nothing about the courage. Just thank you for the 35 cents. Hayes and his mother eat their hamburgers sitting on a bench in the colored section of the town square. The white section, 20 yards away, has families celebrating returning veterans. A small band plays. People laugh. Children run between the benches. 20 yards away in the colored section, Marcus Hayes eats his hamburger and tastes ashes. The hamburger is identical to Morrison's. The paper wrapping is identical. The price is identical. Everything is. Identical except where you're allowed to eat it. His mother asks, was it worth it? She doesn't specify what. Doesn't need to. He knows she means everything. The training, the combat, the kills, the missions, the risk, the courage, the proof. Was it worth it to save lives for a country that won't let you eat a hamburger at a counter? Hayes doesn't answer immediately. He watches white families in their section, watches children playing, watches normal life continuing for people who never had, to prove their humanity through combat. Finally, he says, I don't know, Mother. We saved thousands. Shot down 211 enemy aircraft. Lost only 27 bombers and 15,000 missions. No other group came close. The statistics prove we're the best. But I'm sitting in a colored section eating a hamburger I couldn't eat inside. He pauses, looks at his medals. I thought maybe it would matter. I thought maybe excellence would be enough. I was wrong. Catherine says Nung. What could she say? That she's proud. She is. That he did the right thing? He did. That it will get better? She doesn't believe it. She just holds his hand. The hand that flew combat missions. The hand that saved lives. The hand that trembles slightly as he realizes that courage changes nothing when the system is designed to resist change. July through December, 1945. The pilots of the 332nd Fighter Group scatter across America, returning to homes in 43 states. Every single one encounters the same walls, the same barriers, the same systematic denial of basic dignity. Pilots with distinguished flying crosses denied service at restaurants. Pilots with air medals forced to backseats of buses. Pilots with Purple Hearts beaten by civilians who consider their uniforms an insult. Lieutenant David Wilson, Hayes's wingman who saved 17 bombers in 63 missions, is arrested in Mississippi for trying to vote. The registrar, a white man who never served in the military, tells Wilson his application is denied. When Wilson protests, citing his military service, the registrar calls the police. Wilson spends 3 days in jail. The charges are eventually dropped, but the message is clear. Your service doesn't matter. Your courage doesn't matter. Your sacrifices don't matter. The only thing that matters is the color of your skin. Major Robert Coleman applies for a job as a commercial pilot. He has logged 2,347 FIO light hours in combat. He has commanded 312 pilots. He has a perfect safety record. The airline rejects his application without interview. They hire white pilots with 1/10 his experience. Pilots who washed out of combat training. Pilots who never flew under fire. The rejection letter is polite, professional, and absolute. It doesn't mention race. It doesn't need to. Lieutenant Thomas Mitchell, the pilot shot down over Austria, returns to Georgia. He tries to use the GI Bill to attend college. The colleges in Georgia are segregated. The white colleges don't accept Negro students regardless of military service. The Negro colleges are underfunded, overcrowded, lacking the resources promised by the GI Bill. Mitchell eventually attends a Negro college in Tennessee. He graduates 4 years later with a teaching degree. He teaches mathematics at a segregated high school for 37 years. He never mentions his combat service to his students. When they ask about the distinguished flying cross in his desk drawer, he says only, "That was a long time ago." The pattern repeats across America. Pilots with unprecedented combat records, with skills that should guarantee success in any field, with courage proven beyond doubt, are systematically denied opportunities given automatically to white veterans with inferior records. Some become teachers. Some become postal workers. Some become janitors. All of them are overqualified. None of them complain. What would be the point? The newspapers that covered the air war extensively, that ran daily stories about bomber crews and fighter aces, that made heroes of white pilots with half the combat records of the Tuskegee Airmen, never run stories about the 302nd Fighter Group's return home. Never interview the pilots. Never mention the statistics. Never acknowledge that the most effective fighter group in the war is being treated as second-class citizens in the country they defended. In classified military reports, analysts study the 332nd's tactics, try to understand how they achieved such low loss rates. The reports identify key factors: discipline in maintaining escort positions, refusal to break formation to pursue individual kills, superior marksmanship training, exceptional flight training at Tuskegee. The reports recommend these tactics be adopted by all fighter groups in future conflicts. The reports never mention that these tactics were developed by Negro pilots. When the Korean War begins, 5 years later, integrated fighter groups will use tactics perfected by the Tuskegee Airmen without knowing their origin. March 1946. 1 year after Lieutenant Hayes saved Captain Morrison's life over Berlin. Hayes works as a mechanic in a garage in Tuskegee. He changes oil, rotates tires, replaces brake pads. The owner, a white man named Thomas Edwards, hired him because he needed a good mechanic, and Hayes came highly recommended. Edwards pays him less than white mechanics' wit. H-equivalent skills. Hayes knows this. Edwards knows Hayes knows. Neither discusses it. This is the accommodation available. Better than nothing. Worse than justice. Morrison, meanwhile, has been promoted to major. He commands a bomber squadron at a base in Kansas. He flies training missions, prepares for future conflicts, receives regular recognition for his combat service in Europe. His life trajectory upward, carried by the momentum of recognition and opportunity. Hayes's life trajectory sideways. held in place by the gravity of systematic discrimination. Both men served identically. Both men showed courage. Both men risked everything. Their paths diverged not because of different choices, but because of different doors available to them. In March 1946, Hayes writes his last letter to the Army Air Forces. He requests information about bomber loss rates for the missions he flew. He wants the official numbers. He wants confirmation of what he knows. The response comes. 3 months later, a form letter stating that detailed mission statistics are classified and cannot be released to individuals. The statistics that would prove his group's unprecedented success are locked away in filing cabinets, protected by classification stamps, rendered invisible by bureaucratic procedure. Hayes never writes again. He works in the garage for 43 years, changes oil, rotates tires, saves money, raises 3 children, tells them about the war only when they ask direct. Lie, and even then tells only partial truths. Yes, I was a pilot. Yes, I flew in Europe. Yes, we did our part. He doesn't tell them about the statistics, doesn't tell them about being the best, doesn't tell them about saving thousands of lives, doesn't tell them about the contradictions, the colored sections, the closed doors. What would be the point? They're living through similar contradictions. They know about closed doors. His children integrate schools in the 1960s. Face mobs. Face threats. Come home with questions about why people hate them. Hayes has no answers. How do you explain to children that you saved hundreds of white lives, and those same white people won't let you eat at their restaurants? How do you explain that excellence doesn't matter when the system is designed to resist excellence? How do you explain that you proved your humanity at 7,000 meters and returned to a country that refused to acknowledge the proof? 1968. Lieutenant Marcus Hayes, retired, watches television coverage of the Apollo program. White astronauts, all military pilots, many with combat experience, preparing to fly to the moon. The program is presented as the pinnacle of American achievement, the proof of American excellence, the demonstration of American courage. Hayes, who demonstrated similar courage over Germany, watches from his living room in Tuskegee and thinks about different doors, different opportunities, different Americas existing in the same country. The astronauts are heroes. Rightfully so. Their courage is real. But Hayes wonders what different group of astronauts might exist if doors had opened equally, if his generation of pilots had received opportunities matching their abilities, if courage and skill had mattered more than skin color. How many Negro pilots from the 332nd might have become astronauts if NASA didn't have the same barriers as Mississippi restaurants? How many engineers from Tuskegee might have designed rockets if universities had welcomed them? How much American excellence was lost because excellence wasn't enough to open closed doors? He doesn't speak these thoughts aloud. His wife, Louise, understands them anyway. After 43 years together, after raising 3 children through segregation and integration, after watching grandchildren born into a country still struggling with the same contradictions, she knows his silences. She brings him coffee. They watch the moon landing together. And Armstrong steps onto the lunar surface. Hayes' eyes water. Pride for human achievement. Grief for human waste. Both emotions equally real, equally valid, equally painful. July 1998. 53 years after returning home, Marcus Hayes, 76 years old, receives a phone call from the Pentagon. The United States Air Force is conducting a historical review of fighter groups from World War II. They want to interview surviving members of the 392nd. Hayes agrees. 3 weeks later, a white captain arrives at his house with recording equipment and questions. The captain, Jennifer Morrison, is Captain Richard Morrison's granddaughter. She doesn't know this connection. Neither does Hayes. She asks standard questions. Number of missions flown, combat victories confirmed, awards received. Hayes answers precisely, his memory sharp despite 5 decades. 89 missions, 9 confirmed kills, Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal with 8 oak leaf clusters. The CA. Obtain records everything, professional and courteous. Then she asks, Mr. Hayes, do you remember any specific missions that stand out? Hayes pauses. Remembers March 24th, 1945. Remembers saving the B-17 formation. Remembers saving Morrison's life. Says only, they all stand out, Captain. Every mission mattered. Every bomber we protected carried 10 men. Fathers, brothers, sons. We understood the weight of that responsibility. Captain Morrison asks, the records show, our group had remarkably low loss rates. How did you achieve that? Hayes considers his answer. Could tell her about the tactics, the discipline, the training. Instead says, "We couldn't afford to lose bombers, Captain. We had to be better. Had to be perfect. Anything less and they would have disbanded us, sent us home, used our imperfection as proof we shouldn't be flying, so we were perfect. Or as close as human beings can get to perfect." He doesn't mention the contradiction. Doesn't mention. That perfection earned them the right to continued service, but not the right to eat at counters or drink from fountains or walk through front doors. The captain wouldn't understand. How could she? She grew up in a different America. One where doors opened for her automatically. Where her excellence was assumed rather than requiring constant proof. Where her grandfather's life was saved by a man she's interviewing without knowing the connection. The interview concludes. Captain Morrison thanks him for his service. She means it sincerely. Hayes accepts the thanks with the grace of a man who waited 53 years to hear it from official sources. After she leaves, he sits in his living room thinking about coincidence and irony. Morrison's granddaughter interviewing him, never knowing her grandfather lived to have children because Hayes pulled the trigger on a Focke-Wulf at 7,000 meters above Berlin. These connections exist beneath the surface of official history, invisible and uncredited. 2007, 62 years after returning home, the United States Congress authorizes the Congressional Gold Medal for the Tuskegee Airmen. It is the highest civilian honor Congress can grant. 308 pilots are still alive to receive it. 684 have died. Major Robert Coleman died in 1993. Lieutenant David Wilson died in 2001. Lieutenant Thomas Mitchell died in 2004. They flew perfect missio. They saved thousands of lives. They died without official recognition. The ceremony occurs in the Capitol Rotunda. 308 men, average age 85, wearing suits that hang loose on frames shrunk by age, assembled to receive the recognition that should have come in 1945. 62 years late. 62 years of living without acknowledgement. 62 years of knowing excellence meant nothing when doors remained closed. 62 years of watching white vet. Errands with inferior records receive automatic respect, while they proved and proved and proved, and the proof was never enough. Marcus Hayes, 85 years old, attends with his wife, his 3 children, his 7 grandchildren. He wears his Distinguished Flying Cross for the first time in 50 years. The medal feels heavier than he remembers. Or perhaps he just feels older. The ceremony includes speeches about courage and sacrifice and the American spirit. Every word is true, and every word is incomplete because the speeches don't mention the colored sections, the closed doors, the systematic denial of dignity that continued after the courage was proven. After the ceremony, a white veteran approaches Hayes. The man is 87, moves slowly with a cane, wears a jacket with 483rd Bombardment Group patches. He stops in front of Hayes, studies his face, seems to be calculating something. Finally asks, "Were you Red Tail? Did you fly March 45 over Berlin?" Hayes nods. Yes, sir. March 24th specifically. Why do you ask? The veteran's eyes water. I was there. B-17, lead formation. We got jumped by Focke-Wulfs. Red Tails saved us. All 50 of us made it home because of you. He pauses, struggling with emotion and time, and the weight of words unsaid for 62 years. I never knew who you were. Never got to say thank you. Never even knew your name. Just saw red tails and knew we'd be okay. Hayes extends his hand. They shake. The veteran, whose name is Richard Morrison Jr., son of the Captain Morrison who Hayes saved, grandson of Dorothy Morrison who slid telegrams across counters without acknowledgement, holds Hayes's hand and says, "Thank you. Thank you for my father's life. Thank you for my life. Thank you for everything." Hayes accepts the gratitude with the grace of a man who has learned that recognition matters less than truth. Morrison continues, "I wish I'd known earlier. I wish I'd thanked you decades ago. I wish..." He trails off. Wishes are cheap. Time is irreplaceable. Hayes says simply, "You're welcome, sir. We were just doing our job." The same words he radioed 62 years ago. Still true. Still insufficient to capture the complexity of doing a job perfectly for a country that refused to acknowledge the perfection. They talk for 17 minutes. Morrison describes the mission from his perspective. The terror of seeing fighters diving, the relief of seeing red tails intercept, the awe at watching Hayes and High Wingman destroy 3 German fighters in less than 5 minutes. Hayes listens, nods, confirms details. It's cathartic for both men. Morrison finally expressing gratitude held for 6 decades. Hayes finally receiving acknowledgement of what he did. When Morrison asks why the 392nd wasn't recognized immediately, Hayes considers lying, considers softening the truth, considers protecting Morrison from the ugliness. Then decides truth is owed. Says, "We couldn't eat at the same restaurants as the men we saved, sir. Couldn't drink from the same fountains. Couldn't walk through the same doors. We were good enough to die for the country, but not good enough to be treated as full citizens. That's why the recognition took 62 years. Morrison has no response. What could he say? He knows this history. Every American over 70 knows this history. They lived through it. But knowing abstractly is different from hearing it from the man who saved your father's life. Morrison stands silent. His cane supporting weight made heavier by understanding. Finally, he asks, "How do you not hate us?" Hayes considers the question. "It's fair." He says, "Hate is exhausting, sir. We didn't have energy for hate. We used our energy to fly perfectly, to save lives, to prove ourselves. We thought maybe perfection would be enough. It wasn't. But hate wouldn't have changed that. Hate wouldn't have opened doors. Hate wouldn't have saved the thousands of men we saved. So we focused on what we could see. Entrol, excellence." They exchange information. Promise to stay in touch. Morrison leaves. Hayes watches him go, this white veteran connected to him by a moment 62 years ago at 7,000 meters above Berlin. Connected by blood and combat and salvation, and the terrible irony that salvation wasn't enough to earn dignity in the country they both defended. That night, lying in bed, Louise asks Marcus how he feels. He considers the question. How does he feel? Vindicated? Partially. Bit. Somewhat. Proud? Absolutely. Sad? Deeply. He says, "I feel like we were right. We were the best. The statistics proved it. But being right didn't matter as much as we hoped it would. Being the best didn't open doors. Excellence without acknowledgement is just pain with purpose." Louise takes his hand. The hand that flew 89 missions. The hand that shot down 9 fighters. The hand that saved hundreds of lives. The hand that trembled eating a hamburger in a colored section 62 years ago. She says what she has said for 62 years. "I'm proud of you. It's not enough. Nothing is enough. But it's what she has." 2024. 79 years after the war ended. The Smithsonian Museum opens an exhibit on the Tuskegee Airmen. The centerpiece is a P-51C Mustang painted in the distinctive red tail markings. The plaque describes the 332nd Fighter Group's achievements. 15,733 sorties. 15,000 bomber escorts. 211 enemy aircraft destroyed. 112 destroyed on the ground. Bomber loss rate of 0.18%. 66 distinguished flying crosses awarded. 96 killed in action or accidents. The statistics are finally public. Finally official. Finally acknowledged. 79 years late. Marcus Hayes died in 2009 at age 87. He never saw this exhibit, never saw official public recognition of the statistics he knew were true in 1945. Never saw the plaque describing his group as the most effective fighter group in the European theater. He knew this in 1945, worked in a garage anyway, changed oil anyway, lived with the contradiction anyway. His daughter, Angela Hayes Morrison, married to the grandson of Richard Morrison, in a union that would have been illegal in Alabama when she was born, brings her children to the exhibit. 3 grandchildren who never met Marcus Hayes stand before the EP-51C Mustang and ask questions. "Grandma, Grandpa really flew these?" "Yes." "Grandma, he really saved all those people?" "Yes." "Grandma, why didn't anyone thank him?" Pause. How to explain. How to make children understand. Angela says, "They thanked him eventually, but it took a very long time. Too long. Your grandfather knew he was excellent. He didn't need recognition to know his worth, but he deserved recognition anyway. Everyone deserves to be acknowledged for their excellence." The child. Wrens study the aircraft, the red tail, the placards describing missions and courage and achievement. They see their grandfather's name listed among the pilots. Marcus Hayes, Lieutenant, 100th Fighter Squadron, 89 combat missions, 9 confirmed kills, Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal with 8 oak leaf clusters. The official record finally matches the truth. 79 years late, but finally accurate. A white family approaches the exhibit. The father, perhaps 50 years old, reads the placard aloud to his children. seems genuinely shocked by the statistics. Says to his wife, "I never knew. Why didn't they teach us this in school?" His wife has no answer. Why indeed? Why were these statistics buried for decades? Why did excellence require 79 years to achieve recognition? The questions answer themselves for anyone willing to examine the answers honestly. Angela watches this family discover history they should have learned decades ago. Feels a complex mixture of vindication and bitterness. Vindicated that her father's achievements are finally acknowledged publicly. Bitter that the acknowledgement came too late for him to see. He died believing his service mattered to himself and his family, but not to the country he defended. Died before public recognition could provide closure. The museum closes. Visitors leave. The P-51C Mustang remains, suspended in the atrium, frozen in flight, its red tail still distinctive after 79 years. The aircraft that couldn't prevent Marcus Hayes from being forced to colored sections. The aircraft that couldn't open restaurant doors. The aircraft that couldn't earn him respect in the country he defended. The aircraft that proved excellence wasn't enough when the system was designed to resist excellence. But the aircraft remains. The statistics remain. The truth remains. And perhaps, 79 years late, recognition finally matters to the generations who never had to prove their humanity through MBAT, who can walk through front doors automatically, who inherit opportunities purchased by the sacrifices of pilots who received no opportunities themselves. In the museum gift shop, visitors can purchase books about the Tuskegee Airmen, can buy models of P-51C Mustangs with red tails, can buy posters with inspiring quotes about courage and perseverance. The gift shop exists because excellence, denied and delayed and diminished for 79 years, has finally become marketable. The irony would not be lost on Marcus Hayes. Excellence, commercially viable 79 years after it was socially unacceptable. The museum guide, a young black woman named Jennifer, gives tours 3 days per week. She tells visitors about the 332nd Fighter Group, about their achievements, about their statistics. She tells the sanitized version, suitable for families, emphasizing courage and achievement. She mentions segregation briefly, contextualizes it as challenges they overcame. She doesn't mention-colored sections or closed doors, or the systematic denial of dignity. Too painful, too raw, too honest for a museum gift shop experience. But sometimes, when older visitors ask probing questions, when they want the full truth, Jennifer tells them about the contradictions, about pilots who saved lives at 7,000 meters and couldn't eat at counters at sea level, about excellence insufficient to open doors, about recognition delayed 79 years. These conversations happen quiet, lie away from families with children, in corners of the exhibit where the truth can be spoken without destroying the inspiration. One visitor, a white veteran from Iraq, asks Jennifer, "Did this change anything? Did their service actually matter?" Jennifer considers her response carefully, says, "They integrated the military. That mattered. They proved excellence. That mattered. They saved thousands of lives. That definitely mattered. But did it change America immediately? No. Change took decades. Some would say, change is still happening. Their service planted seeds that took generations to grow." The veteran nods, unsatisfied but understanding. Some questions have no satisfying answers. Did it matter? Yes. Was it worth it? Impossible to calculate. Should recognition have come earlier? Obviously. Does delayed recognition count? Partially. The contradictions remain even in acknowledgement. The museum closes for the day. Lights dim. The P-51C Mustang remains suspended in darkness. Its red tail invisible without illumination. Its history present but unseen. Its truth waiting for morning when lights return and visitors come, and the cycle of discovery and education and incomplete understanding continues. Somewhere in Alabama, in a cemetery outside Tuskegee, Marcus Hayes rests under a headstone that lists his service. Lieutenant, United States Army Air Forces, World War II, Distinguished Flying Cross, 1922 to 2009. The stone doesn't mention that he fed hundreds of lives. Doesn't mention that he was statistically among the best pilots America ever produced. Doesn't mention that he changed oil in a garage for 43 years, because excellence wasn't enough to overcome closed doors. The stone, like most official records, tells partial truth, but his children know, his grandchildren know, his great-grandchildren, walking through front doors that open automatically, attending schools that are integrated, pursuing opportunities that were denied to their great-grandfather. They know. They carry his story. They understand that the doors that opened for them remained closed for him. They comprehend the price paid for their opportunities. They recognize that excellence, proven at 7,000 meters above Germany, earned not immediate reward, but delayed acknowledgement, and the bitter knowledge that courage, however perfect, couldn't overcome systematic discrimination designed to resist even perfection. And perhaps that's the lesson. No, that excellence doesn't matter. Excellence matters profoundly. Not that courage is wasted. Courage is never wasted. Not that service is unappreciated. Service is appreciated eventually, decades late. Insufficient, but sincere. The lesson is simpler and harder. Excellence should be enough. Courage should be enough. Service should be enough. But in America, for too long, for too many, excellence and courage and service weren't enough because the doors were closed not by merit, but by melanin. The Red Tails saved thousands of American lives. The Tuskegee Airmen proved themselves beyond any possible doubt, and they returned home to colored sections and side entrances and systematic denial of the dignity their excellence earned. This is not ancient history. Marcus Hayes died in 2009. Men who lived this contradiction died within the last 20 years. The injustice is not theoretical or distant. It is immediate and personal and documented. The P-51C Mustang in the Smithsonian represents many things. Represents courage and skill and achievement. Represents technological advancement and military success. Represents American air power and the defeat of fascism. But it also represents closed doors and delayed recognition, and the bitter truth that being the best wasn't enough when the system valued skin color over excellence. Both truths exist simultaneously. Both must be acknowledged. The heroism was real. The injustice was real. The excellence was real. The humiliation was real. Any telling that emphasizes one while minimizing the other is incomplete. Any understanding that celebrates achievement without acknowledging cost is insufficient. Any recognition that comes 79 years late must acknowledge the 79 years of denial that preceded it. The exhibit closes permanently in 2030. The P-51C Mustang will be moved to permanent collection storage. Future visitors will see different exhibits, learn different histories, discover different errant truths. But the statistics remain, the truth remains, the contradiction remains, and the lesson, hard-earned at 7,000 meters, and in colored sections and through closed doors and delayed recognition, remains. Excellence should be enough. The fact that it wasn't reveals not the failure of excellence, but the failure of the system that refused to acknowledge excellence when it came with the wrong skin color. Marcus Hayes knew this in 1945, knew it in 1960 WWII, knew it in 2007 when he finally received Congressional Gold Medal, knew it when he died in 2009. He lived the contradiction. He embodied the excellence. He endured the denial. And he left descendants who walk through doors he couldn't open, doors that should never have been closed, doors that required 79 years and countless sacrifices to open. The Red Tails saved thousands. The statistics prove it. The Tuskegee Airmen returned to closed doors. The WWII confirms it. Both truths matter. Both truths persist. And both truths remind us that excellence, however perfect, however proven, however necessary, wasn't enough to overcome systematic injustice designed to resist even perfection. That's the story. That's the history. That's the bitter truth 79 years later, acknowledged finally, insufficiently, necessarily. The Red Tails flew perfectly, and it wasn't enough. But their descendants fly now in an integrated air force, inheriting opportunities denied to those who proved those opportunities should never have been denied. Progress, decades late, purchased by excellence that couldn't open doors for those who demonstrated it, but opened doors for those who followed.